Welcome to the Effortless English Show with the world's #1 English teacher, AJ Hogue, where AJ's more than 40 million students worldwide finally learn English once and for all, without the boring textbooks, classrooms, and grammar drills. Here's AJ with a quick piece to help you learn to speak fluent English effortlessly.
Hi, I'm AJ Hogue, the author of Effortless English. Learn to speak English like a native. Go to effortlessenglishclub.com. effortlessenglishclub.com. Join my VIP program at effortlessenglishclub.com. Book club today, continuing with our book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. Today, we will do half of chapter 2. We will start chapter 2. We'll stop in the middle. Next week, we will finish chapter 2. It's another long chapter and has some very important ideas that we need to discuss. So we'll go slowly so that we can learn everything in the chapter. All right, let's begin, shall we? Let's just go right to it. Those of you watching on video, you can see my screen. And if you're not watching on my video, if you're just listening, no worries. I will explain everything. Okay, here we go. Chapter 2, the title is Why Teach Financial Literacy? Why teach financial literacy? And literacy actually means reading, the ability to read. The ability to read and understand is literacy. So financial literacy means able to read and understand finances, money. What does that mean? Well, we'll find out in a minute from the chapter. So let's continue. As usual, Robert Kiyosaki begins the chapter with the big idea. The main idea of the chapter is right at the beginning. It says, it's not how much money you make. It's how much money you keep. It's not meaning it's not important. There's a word missing that we just understand. So the idea is it's not important how much money you make. It's important how much money you keep. This is an important difference because most people focus on the first one, how much they make or how much someone makes. But that's not really the key point to understand to be rich. Okay, then he tells us what's happening in his life when he's writing the book. So when he wrote the book, he was age 47. Remember last chapter, he told us the story of his childhood at age 9. Now he's jumping ahead to when he's writing the book, age 47. And now, I can't remember, I think Robert Kiyosaki's in his 60s now. But he said, I retired at the age of 47. Actually, so no, he's actually older when he wrote the book. But he said he retired at the age of 47. And his wife, Kim, retired at the age of 37. That's nice, right? A lot of people, they think of retirement as age 65 or 67, something like that. Well, he retired very early at the age of 47. Now, he says retirement does not mean not working. It doesn't mean you do no work at all. He says for us, it means that as long as there's not a disaster, we can work or not work. Doesn't matter. And our money, our wealth will continue to grow. So he said that's what retirement means for him. That's what I would call financial freedom. He calls it retirement. I call it financial freedom. Financial freedom means you will continue to make money if you work or if you don't work. It doesn't matter. Either way, you will still continue to make money. Your money will continue to grow if you work or if you don't work. That's financial freedom. How do you achieve this? He says, think of it like planting a tree, right? You have like a seed or a small tree. You put it in the ground, and for many years you have to water it, right? Give it water, take care of it. So that's like working. And its roots start growing deep. And then finally, the roots grow so deep that you can stop watering. You don't need to water it anymore, right? The tree becomes, you could say, financially free is what he's talking about, of course, but the tree becomes independent, basically. The roots go so deep that you don't need to keep working to take care of it. It can now find water itself. And now you can just enjoy the tree. It will give you shade. You can enjoy the tree without working. And it will still continue growing and giving you some happiness or beauty in your life. This is the idea with your wealth. If you know how to handle money, then you have to work for a while, of course, building up your financial freedom. But eventually when you achieve financial freedom, then the money will just start to grow on its own because you created the right system. And then you don't really need to work so much. Maybe just, look at it, manage it a little bit, a very small amount of time. And you can continue to grow, to continue to grow it and to enjoy it without working very much or without working really at all. And he says, he gives us an update on his friend Mike. His friend Mike grew up he took over his dad's business. So remember, Rich Dad was Mike's dad. When Mike grew up and now also in his 40s, Rich Dad gave his son Mike all those businesses, and now his son runs the business empire, and he's still very rich. Then there's a little kind of side section where it's like a little story where, once again, Robert Kiyosaki wants to show the difference between how much money you make or have and how much you keep. And he talks about way back in 1923 in America, in the United States, that there was a big meeting of the richest businessmen in the world. And then he just, he says the names. There are a bunch of them. And at that time, these guys were the richest in the world, like, Bill Gates and Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos now. And he says what's interesting is that 10 years later, almost all of those men were broke. They had no money. And many of them killed themselves, committed suicide. And of course, we know 1923, what happened was the Great Depression, the big stock market crash of 1929. So 6 years after that meeting, when they were all the super rich and they were all great, 6 years later, the stock market crashed, huge depression, and most of these guys lost all their money. And unfortunately for them, they just became super depressed, and most of them killed themselves. And a few of them just died broke with no money. Pretty sad story. So he's saying the point of this story is to show that, for those men, it seemed like they were great and powerful and rich, but then just a few years later, they were completely broke. So again, he's like, it's not just getting the money that's important, it's keeping it. That's very important. Excuse me. So his point is, he says that intelligence solves problems and produces money. Money without financial intelligence is soon gone. soon disappears. So he's saying that, everybody wants to know, how can I make a lot of money? But he's saying you first need to understand and learn financial intelligence, because it's your financial intelligence that will help you earn more money and, more importantly, help you to keep it. And then he gives another example, which we talked about last week. So same example of people who win the lottery, right? These lotteries, that they have them in different countries where you can buy a ticket and you try to guess the number. And, a lot of times somebody wins it and they suddenly, win $50 million or some huge amount. And there are many, many stories of these people who win huge amounts of money, and then 5 years later, 10 years later, they're broke. They somehow spent it all or lost it all. They become poor again. So his point is, again, that what makes you rich and keeps you rich, what makes you truly financially free, is your financial intelligence, not just suddenly getting a lot of money, not getting lucky with money. And he points out that most people don't have this. He mentions that most kids graduate from school with almost no financial foundation, financial understanding, financial literacy. So he's saying that our school system does not teach this. Even though we live in this modern time with these modern systems of money, and money is at the center of our lives, we don't learn how to make it and keep it. Most of us don't learn in school. Most kids don't learn. And then finally, he gets to rule number 1, which he says is the most important rule of this whole book. In fact, he said it is the only really important rule. That if you just remember one thing from this book, remember this one rule. This is how you get rich and stay rich. And it's super simple. Are you ready? Here it is. Rich people acquire assets. The poor and middle class acquire liabilities that they think are assets. Rule number 1, you must know the difference between an asset and a liability, and you must buy assets. So the rule is you have to know what is an asset and what is an liability. What's the difference between those two, asset, liability? And then you have to buy assets. That's how you become rich. That's it. Rich people acquire assets. Acquire means to get and keep, to own. The poor and middle class acquire liabilities that they think are assets. So understand that phrase, that paragraph there. Most people, the poor and the middle class, most people, they think they understand the difference. They think they know what an asset is. They think they understand. And they think they are buying assets. But they're not. They're actually wrong, and they're buying liabilities, and that's why they never become rich. Or if you prefer, you can use the word financially free instead of rich. So what is it? Here's the very easy definition from Robert Kiyosaki. Now, this is not the definition you will find in a dictionary, and it is not the definition you will find in an accounting textbook. So it's important to understand this. This is a very practical, personal finance definition of an asset and of a liability. It's very simple, it's very clear, and very important. You must understand this. If you don't understand these two, then you're not understanding his book and you're missing the whole point of Rich Dad, Poor Dad. So here it is. It's very simple. An asset puts money in my pocket, in your pocket. A liability takes money out of your pocket. That's it. We'll talk a little bit more about it in a second. So he's saying that if you want to really understand assets and liabilities, and if you want to get rich, you need to understand the numbers, right? Not words, not the definition in words. You need to understand how the numbers work. You have to be able to read the numbers, right? Your financial numbers. Money's about numbers. So then he has, if you're watching on video, you can see he has these little diagrams. And it's just 4 rectangles. 2 rectangles together on top, and then 2 rectangles together underneath. The 2 on top are called income statement. They're labeled income statement. And one rectangle, one box says income, and the other says expenses. That's the top, income statement. On the bottom, there's also 2 boxes or rectangles. The bottom says balance sheet. And one box says assets and one says liabilities. So we have the income statement on top, which is income and expenses. And we have the balance sheet on the bottom, assets and liabilities. That's it. This is how you read your finances. So you could just draw these yourself on a notebook. Just use pen and paper. And you could get a picture of your own finances, your own money. You would just, in each box, you would list. So in your income box, you would list all of your income and how much. In your expenses, you would list all your expenses and how much. And then your balance sheet, you would list your assets, how much they produce, and your liabilities, how much they subtract. Then he says, let's look at the cash flow of a poor person. First he shows of a liability. So there's a connection between these 4 boxes. So liabilities are connected to expenses. Assets are connected to income, right? Because liabilities create expenses. Assets create income. That's the definition, right? Liability takes money out of your pocket or out of your bank, right? Therefore, it creates an expense. And so he shows on this little thing, he has an arrow. He's got a circle and liabilities. So there's a liability. Then a line, it goes up into the expenses. And then the line and the arrow go out. So out of your bank account, right? So you have the liability. The liability is a property. Okay, it's something you own. It's a liability. This liability creates an expense. It costs you money. And that expense causes the money to go out of your bank. That's how a liability works. All right. Next, he shows some what he calls cash flow patterns of the poor, the middle class, and the rich. So he shows these are very simplified. He says these are simplified just to exaggerate and give you the basic idea. So here's what poor people do. Poor people have a job which creates income, a salary, right? So the arrow first, there's a little circle for job. It goes into income for their salary. And then the line goes down into expenses. So in other words, what do they use their income for? Poor people use their income for expenses. They pay taxes, they pay rent, they buy food, transportation, clothes, computers, phones, whatever, right? They buy stuff. So whatever income they have, they spend it and it goes out. And that's it. That's what poor people do. If they make $5 from a job, they spend $5. If they make $100, they spend $100. If they make $1,000, they spend $1,000. That's what poor people do. Then he shows what do middle class people do. So, of course, middle class people have those same expenses, but what they also do, in addition, what they do is they take their salary and they buy liabilities. What are liabilities? He gives some examples. A mortgage, that's a house loan. So they buy a house to live in. That's a liability. They buy a car with a car loan, right? So most people, when they buy a new car, they get a loan from the car company or a bank. When they buy a house or a condo, same thing, they get a loan from the bank. So these are liabilities. They have credit card debt. So they buy a bunch of other stuff using their credit card debt, that's a liability. And then possibly other loans also. So those are liabilities, and each of those liabilities costs money, right? Each one creates an expense, right? There's the mortgage. The loan for the house creates the expense of a monthly mortgage payment, right? It's a mortgage payment. That's the expense. A car loan that you own, you own or you have this car loan, or this car, and it creates expenses, right? You have to pay that loan every month. So that's money that goes out. Credit card, if you have a credit card debt, well then every month you have to pay at least the minimum payment. That's an expense every month. That's the middle class. Now, rich people may have some of those things too, of course, but he shows you what's most important for rich people is this. They buy assets. They may do it in the beginning with a job, and instead of buying liabilities, they buy assets. And that's the key difference for the rich. They may also have some of those same liabilities, like the middle class, but they also buy assets. And then he has some examples of that. Real estate, right, which produces rent income. Stocks can produce dividends. That's income. Bonds can produce interest payments. And then intellectual property, businesses, all of these kind of things. Those are assets that they own, and those assets every month produce income. They put money into the bank. Rental income, dividends, interest payments, that kind of thing. So he's saying this is the key point you must understand. This is the difference between the poor, the middle class, and the rich. If you don't understand this, he's saying, if you don't understand how to use these cash flow diagrams, patterns, if you don't understand how to buy real assets, if you don't understand what a real asset is, if you're confused, like most people, and you think liabilities are assets, then you're never going to be rich. You're never going to be financially free. And if you get more money, you're just going to continue making the same mistakes, and therefore your problems will not be solved, and therefore you will never become financially free. Even if you make 2 times more money or 3 times more money, you still will not be financially free because you'll still repeat the pattern of a poor person or a middle class person. And so and he's exactly right about this. This is the problem with professional athletes many times. They may make millions and millions and millions. I mean, they all, I can't, for the top professional leagues in the United States, they're all millionaires after a few years. But, there was a documentary recently I saw about it. Most of them after, I think it's 5 years, most of them are bankrupt. Can you believe that? Most of them are poor after 5 years of quitting. So this explains why. It's because they still have the same pattern of spending, the same financial pattern, the same financial thinking as a poor person. So just because you give them millions of dollars, but they still keep spending their money like a poor person. And so while they're making all that money while they play, it looks like they're rich. They've got great clothes and cars and everything. But as soon as they stop playing, the money eventually is gone, and fairly quickly, because of this pattern. They have a poor person's pattern of money management. And the same thing can happen with people who are middle class, who maybe become upper middle class, and they start making quite a lot of money, but they still seem like they're slaves to work. They can't retire even if they want to. They just got to keep working like crazy, because they have the middle class pattern. They keep buying liabilities with all that extra money, and they can never get free. So he's saying most people just spend everything they get. So if you give them more, they just spend more. And then he talks about how many professionals, many educated people go to school, they get out of school, and he's talking about even doctors, lawyers, the big professions. People think, make lots of money. He says, but they get out, but they don't really understand money, and they still struggle financially, or they have to just work harder and harder and harder and harder. And that this can become a nightmare. All right, that is the first half. But I want to focus on the main ideas here, which are these patterns and the difference. Okay, so this is the key thing. The whole point of this chapter is to understand the difference between an asset and a liability, and to understand Robert Kiyosaki's definition of these two, which is different. So if you go to an accountant, a professional accountant, I'll tell you, because I am an accountant, and if I look on the financial statements, it's an accounting financial statement for a business, for example, or for tax purposes, will look different than this. So, for example, if you go to a bank, to a financial advisor, a big bank, they will tell you that your house that you buy is an asset, right? This is where Robert Kiyosaki says middle class people are being confused, because they think their house is an asset. It's the first thing most middle class people do is they go buy a house, right? As soon as they get extra money, what do? They start saving for a house. This is the most common pattern. Saving for a house, and then, possibly, especially in some place like the United States, they also save for a new car, and they get a new car. So these are the two, fairly big things that most people buy in the United States who are middle class when they have some money. They buy a house, the biggest house they can get usually, and they buy a car, the nicest car they can get. If they can get a new one, they'll get a new one. And they think they are buying assets. They think they are assets. Why do they think they are assets? Why the confusion? Why are so many people confused about the difference between asset and liability? Well, it's because they're using a different definition. Because most people think, well, I buy a house to live in, and it's an asset because I can sell it later for more money, right? If I buy it for $100,000, and 10 years I'll sell it for $150,000, I'll make money. It's an asset. Yes, so I'm going to buy a house. This is a good investment. And Robert Kiyosaki is saying it's not a good investment. It's a bad idea. Why? Well, for one, you're taking a loan, probably. Middle class people almost always are taking a bank loan. So they're paying interest, right? So they're paying much more than just $100,000 for that house. The second problem is that there's no guarantee the price will go up. There's no guarantee. I mean, usually when the housing markets are good, the prices will go up. But, we saw back in 2008, 2009, the housing markets crashed. And some housing markets, depending on the city where you lived, some still have not fully recovered. Others have. But you never know when that crash might come, or how long it will last. So he's like, you have to look at it, immediately. You have to look at it immediately, month to month, next month. Does this thing you bought, this property, does it add money to your bank account or does it take it out? That's the definition. Not what might happen 5 years from now or 10 years from now. No, what will happen right now, this month, next month. So that's why he says, if you have a bank loan on your house, next month you have to pay. That's an expense. Every month you are paying the bank for your house. It's an expense. It's taking money out of your pocket, out of your bank account. Therefore, your house is a liability. It's not an asset. It is not making you richer. And so the same idea with a car. Many people will buy a new car and they'll think that's an asset because they could sell it later. Now, of course, with cars, usually the price will go down, but they'll say, well, yeah, it'll go down, but still it will be worth something, so I could still sell the car and get some kind of money for it. So that's an asset. But he's saying it's not, absolutely not, because once again, if you have a car loan every month, you are paying for the car. It's an expense. It's taking money out of your bank. Even if you don't have a car loan, you're still paying because you have to do maintenance and repair. And that's also true for houses. So he's saying this is the big central point of confusion, especially for the middle class. So then he says, well, what is a real asset according to him? What are assets according to him, right? So an asset is something that puts money into your bank account, let's just say every month, basically in the short term right now. Not you hope the price will go up next year or 5 years from now or 10 years from now. No, it's putting money into your bank account regularly, automatically. Doesn't matter if the price goes up or down, you're still getting money. So that's where he lists things like real estate, rental real estate. So what's the difference between rental real estate and a house you buy to live in? One's a liability, one is an asset, according to Robert Kiyosaki. It's kind of interesting. Why? Well, you just have to look at his definition. Your own house that you live in is an expense. It's taking money out of your bank. But if you buy a house and you rent it to other people, right? And you charge them more money than the bank loan. So every month you're getting some extra income from that house because you're renting it to other people. Let's say you have a bank loan, you have to pay a bank loan $1,000 a month, but you charge rent $2,000 a month. So you're making $1,000, right? You're making a profit of $1,000 per month. So every month, the rental real estate is adding $1,000 to your bank account. That is an asset. That is an asset. It's making you richer every single month. It's adding to your bank account. It's an asset. It's a simple definition. It really is super, super simple, and it's a great way to think about money. I think for most people, this is exactly what you need. Now, if you're running some huge, big company, maybe you need much more complicated accounting, but for 99% of us, this is how we should be thinking. He's done a really good job of making it clear and simple for all of us. And if you just follow this rule of his, you will eventually become financially free. And especially when you follow my rule also, which is cutting your expenses down and living as simply as possible. So another thing, he mentions stocks as an asset. Why are stocks an asset? Is it because you can sell them for a higher price later? No, actually not. No, that's actually not what makes them an asset. Because again, you don't know if they will go up. They might go down. Let's say you buy, it's called a stock index. You buy an index of the top companies in the stock market. Again, let's say you buy, you buy $1,000 of stock. Again, you don't know. Next year, it might go up, it might go down. So that does not make it an asset. Why is it still an asset? Because dividend payments, dividends, it means every month or sometimes every 3 months, those companies will give a little bit of money. It's not an interest payment, but it's sort of like that, like a small percentage. They'll give you a small percentage of how much you own. It might be 1, 2, 3%. It's usually not high, but it's some percentage, right? And so if you own $1,000 in stock, maybe let's say you make, maybe you make 2% every month. Or it's usually actually an annual, but let's say something like that. Okay, so 2%, 3%, 5%. Doesn't matter what it is, that little bit of money from the stocks, those dividends go into your bank account, adds to your bank account. Even if the stock price drops, so even if the stock price it's 1,000, now it drops, the price is 500. So if you sell it, you'll lose money. But if you don't sell it, if you just hold it and continue to own it, you will still get those dividend payments. It will still produce that income. It might be 2%, it might be 3 or 4 or 5%. Every stock's different. But the point is, the reason it's an asset is because it's producing that income, that little bit of income. As long as you own it and hold it, you will keep getting that little bit of extra income every month from it. It's an asset. It creates income. It adds to your bank account monthly. And then, interest payments, again, interest rates right now are super, super, super low. So you will make very, very little. But still, if you have a bank account, a savings account, and let's say it pays you 1%, it's still an asset. That 1% payment every month is a little bit of money added to your bank account. So the savings account is also an asset. Because again, how do we know? Because it's adding to your bank account, not taking money out. This is the main idea of the whole chapter. This is the only thing you need to understand from this chapter. All right, so just remember that. An asset is something you own that puts money into your bank account regularly, usually monthly. A liability is something you own that takes money out of your bank account regularly, usually monthly. How do you get rich? You buy assets. You buy more and more and more and more assets. Every time you have extra money, you buy an asset. As you buy more and more assets, you get more and more income, and you buy even more assets, and that's how you eventually become financially free and rich. All right, go to effortlessenglishclub.com, effortlessenglishclub.com. Join my VIP program. See you next time.